Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov was born into extreme poverty, but eventually rose to become the commanding general of the entire Soviet Red Army during the Second World War. He is still considered today to be Russia's greatest military strategist in their entire history. This is the life and the story of Marshal Zhukov.
Zhukov was born into extreme poverty in the town of Strelkovka in the Kaluga province of Imperial Russia on the 1st of December 1896. Zhukov once described it himself by saying his house looked like the worst in his village. His family did work hard to provide for him though, as his father was being a cobbler and his mother was a labourer. And in an era when most members of Russia's lower classes completed only 2 years of schooling, Zhukov completed the full 3-year primary education course at his hometown school, meaning he was pretty smart. Family life was harsh and beatings were very common for mistakes. However, the optimist, Zhukov, believed that a hard start in life was one of the best teachers possible. And he had one of the hardest. He was then given an opportunity that advanced his future more than you would think. He was granted an apprenticeship as a furrier for his uncle Mikhail. Although he was frequently beaten, he was in a much better place than he was before. He had more education than he would have had otherwise, and he was exposed to the grand Moscow society. After working, he would take lessons with his cousin in the Russian language, German language, history, maths, and various other subjects. Zhukov seemed to be doing quite well as a man recently entering adulthood. But when World War I broke out in 1914, he was drafted into the Russian army, with little complaint, possibly because he was a bit more educated than most draftees, which meant he got to start out as training as a cavalryman, and quickly rose up the ranks to corporal in the 10th Dragoon Novgorod Regiment. He even managed to earn the Cross of St. George twice, which was the highest award for both non-commissioned officers and enlisted men. One was for the capture of a German soldier, and the other was for taking a grenade explosion and left him in hospital for most of the rest of the war. As a result, he somehow felt that his part in the war had been very minor and that he had achieved little overall.
Because Zhukov had been born into such extreme poverty, he never really liked the old Tsarist political system. So when things started shaking up in Russia, he found himself amongst those who were fighting the old system. When the Tsar abdicated, the country was of course in tatters, but then the provisional government was put in place, but Georgy and the soldiers under him refused to obey any commands given by the new government. They were soon branded as traitors and thus went on the run. However, when the Bolsheviks seized power, he left the shadows and joined them up as a soldier, and then after multiple years of service, he decided to join the Communist Party to further his own career. His abilities as a military strategist and his background of severe poverty made him a bit of a rising star within the military as he continued to work his way up the ranks in the officer corps. He gained further notoriety when he was awarded the Order of the Red Banner for his participation in the put-down of the Tambov Rebellion of 1921. Zhukov quickly advanced through the ranks as the commander of a cavalry troop, then a squadron, then the deputy commander of a cavalry regiment, and then in February 1931 he was appointed the assistant inspector for the cavalry of the Red Army.
In 1938, there was a crisis that not many people know about. Before the world erupted into the Second World War, the Soviets already had their hands full with the invading Japanese forces. Zhukov at this point was a Comcorps, which was a Corps Commander or Colonel General. He was ordered to command the 1st Soviet Mongolian Group Army against Japan's Kwantung Army on the border between the Mongolian People's Republic and the Japanese-controlled state of Manchukuo. The Soviet-Japanese Borders War lasted from 1932 to 1939, 7 years. What began as a border skirmish rapidly escalated into a full-scale war, with the Japanese pushing forward with an estimated 80,000 troops, 180 tanks, and 450 aircraft. These events led to the strategically decisive Battle of Khalkhin Gol. Zhukov requested major reinforcements, and on the 20th of August 1939, his Soviet offensive commenced. After a massive artillery barrage, nearly 500 BT-5 and BT-7 tanks advanced, supported by over 500 fighters and bombers. The first offensive first appeared to be a typical frontal attack. However, 2 tank brigades were held back and then ordered to advance around on both flanks. supported by motorized artillery, infantry and other tanks. This daring and successful maneuver encircled the Japanese 6th Army and captured the enemy's vulnerable rear supply areas. By 31st of August, the Japanese had been cleared from the disputed border, leaving the Soviets clearly victorious, a devastating victory. The campaign had significance beyond the immediate tactical and local outcome. Zhukov had further demonstrated his ability as a military commander. These same tactics he would use against the Germans in the Eastern Front of the Second World War. His innovations in the use of both machines, men and underwater bridges saw a massive increase in the army's overall morale. For this victory, Zhukov was granted the title of Hero of the Soviet Union and was later promoted to full army general or commander arm first class at the time. This victory, however, remained almost unknown outside the Soviet Union and the Japanese Empire despite the crushing victory. Zhukov considered Khalkhin Gol to be, as he says, invaluable preparation for conducting operations during the Second World War.
Though there are those who argue that Zhukov exaggerated his role in the Battle of Khalkhin Gol and other battles in order to aggrandize himself because of the Soviet Union needing a standard bearer, and because he managed to get along with Joseph Stalin. One researcher, by the name of Suvorov, claimed that the victory behind Khalkhin Gol should have in fact gone to his chief of staff, an excellent brigade commander by the name of Mr. M.A. Bogdanov. Despite these claims, Zhukov found himself quickly becoming Stalin's favourite general. Although they argued a lot, Zhukov basically became Stalin's quasi-official second-in-command. Now, there were of course a lot of faults to Zhukov as a military leader. He could be seen to get very angry constantly and using a lot of rude language, even abusing a few people, though this was not out of fashion for a lot of military commanders of the day. There's still a lot of evidence that his men really respected him because he valued their lives. On the 22nd of June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, an invasion of the Soviet Union. On the same day, Zhukov responded by signing the directive of the People's Commissariat of Defence No. 3, which ordered an all-out counter-offensive by Red Army forces. Despite numerical superiority, this manoeuvre failed, and the disorganised Red Army units were destroyed by the Wehrmacht. Zhukov subsequently claimed that he was forced to sign the document by Joseph Stalin. On the 29th of July, Zhukov was removed from his post as the Chief of General Staff of the Army. In his memoirs, he gives a suggested reason of abandoning of Kiev to avoid encirclement as the reason for it. On the next day, the decision was made official and he was appointed the commander of the Reserve Front. There he oversaw the Yelna offensive, delivering the Red Army's first victory over the Germans. On the 10th of September, Zhukov was made the commander of the Leningrad Front, where he oversaw the defence of the city. On the 6th of October, Zhukov was appointed the representative of Stavka for the Reserve and Western Fronts. On the 10th of October, those fronts were merged into the Western Front under Zhukov's command. This front then participated in the Battle of Moscow and several battles of Luziev. In late August of 1942, Zhukov was made the Deputy Commanding-in-Chief and sent to the Southwestern Front to take command of the defence of Stalingrad. Later in November, Zhukov was sent to coordinate the Western Front and Kalinin Front during Operation Mars. In January 1943, he, together with Kliment Voroshilov, coordinated the actions of the Leningrad and Volkhov fronts, and the Baltic Fleet in Operation Iskra. On January 18, 1943, Zhukov was promoted to the rank of Marshal of the Soviet Union, which was equivalent to the rank of Field Marshal and Air Marshal combined. Zhukov was a Stavka coordinator at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943. He was considered the main architect of the Soviet victory, together with Vasilievsky. According to Zhukov's memoirs, he played a central role in the planning of the battle and a hugely successful offensive that followed. Commander of the Central Front, Konstantin Rokossovsky, said, however, that the planning decisions for the Battle of Kursk were made without Zhukov, and he only arrived just before the battle and made no decisions and then left soon afterwards. That Zhukov overall exaggerated his role in the battle. A sense of nature of the beginning of Rokossovsky's famous World War II rivalry with Zhukov can be gathered from reading Rokossovsky's comments in an official report on Zhukov's character. He has a strong will, decisive and firm, often demonstrates initiative and skillfully applies it, disciplined, demanding and persistent in his demands, a somewhat ungracious and non-sufficiently sympathetic person, rather stubborn, painfully proud. In professional terms, well-trained, broadly experienced as a military leader, absolutely cannot be used in staff or teaching jobs because constitutionally he hates them. From the 12th of February 1944, Zhukov coordinated the actions of the 1st Ukrainian and 2nd Ukrainian fronts. On the 1st of March, Zhukov was appointed the commander of the 1st Ukrainian front until early May, following the ambush of Nikolai Batutin, its commander, by the Ukrainian insurgent army near Ostrov. During the Soviet offensive, Operation Bagration, Zhukov commanded the 1st Belarusian and 2nd Belarusian fronts, later the 1st Ukrainian front as well. On the 23rd of August, Zhukov was sent to the 3rd Ukrainian front to prepare for advance into Bulgaria. On the 16th of November, he became the commander of the 1st Belarusian front, which took part in the Vistula Order offensive and the Battle of Berlin. He called on his troops. "Remember our brothers and sisters, our mothers and our fathers, our wives and children, tortured to death by the Germans. We shall exact a brutal revenge for everything." More than 20 million Soviet soldiers and civilians died as a result of the war, in reprise for the atrocities committed by the German soldiers against Soviet civilians in the eastward advance into Soviet territory during Operation Barbarossa. The westward march by Soviet forces was marked by brutality towards German civilians, which included looting, burning, systematic rapes and murders. Zhukov was chosen personally to accept the German instrument of surrender in Berlin. After the German surrender, Zhukov became the first commander of the Soviet occupation zone. On the 10th of June 1945, he returned to Moscow to prepare for the Soviet victory parade. On the 24th of June, Stalin appointed him the commander-in-chief of the parade. Zhukov requested the Soviet government to transport urgently to Berlin 96,000 tons of grain, 60,000 tons of potatoes, 50,000 cattle, and thousands of tons of foodstuffs such as sugar and animal fat. He issued strict orders that his subordinates were to hate Nazism but respect the German people, and to make all possible efforts to restore and maintain stable living standards for the German population. From the 16th of July to the 2nd of August, Zhukov participated in the Potsdam Conference with fellow representatives of Allied governments. As one of the 4 commanders of the Allied occupational forces, Zhukov established good relationships with his new colleagues, General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, and Marshal Jean de Lattre. The 4 frequently exchanged views about such matters such as the sentencing, trials and judgments of war criminals, geopolitical tensions and between the Allied states, and how to defeat the Japanese and rebuild Germany. Eisenhower developed a good relationship with Zhukov, and it proved beneficial in resolving differences in post-war occupational issues. Eisenhower's successor, General Lucas D. Clay, also praised Zhukov-Eisenhower's friendship, and commented, "The Soviet-American relationship should have developed well if Eisenhower and Zhukov had continued to work together." Zhukov and Eisenhower went on a tour of the Soviet Union together in the immediate aftermath of the victory over Germany. During this tour, Eisenhower introduced Zhukov to Coca-Cola. As Coca-Cola was regarded in the Soviet Union as a symbol of American imperialism, Zhukov was apparently reluctant to be photographed or reported on consuming such a product. Zhukov asked if the beverage could be made clear to resemble vodka. A European subsidiary of Coca-Cola Export Corporation delivered 50 initial cases of white Coca-Cola to Marshal Zhukov. Zhukov was not only the supreme military commander of the Soviet occupation zone, but became its military governor in June of 1945. Stalin became quickly paranoid that Zhukov would become a military or political threat to him. Thus he brought Zhukov back to Moscow to face charges of disloyalty. Zhukov had a certain understanding of modern warfare that Stalin did not, and was extremely popular within the military, which was something that Stalin would always be jealous of. As Stalin began to fear General Zhukov, he decided to make an example out of him, though not too big of one. Considering his popularity, Stalin did not think it wise to kill him, or punish him too harshly. He merely wanted to put Zhukov firmly back in his place. Upon his return to Moscow, Zhukov was repeatedly raked over the coals and privately accused of disloyalty to the Communist Party. In order to prevent any possibility of a coup, Stalin removed Zhukov from his position as commander of the military forces, and was shipped off to a smaller position in Odessa, where he suffered his first heart attack. Not long after this, Zhukov found himself back in Moscow for a short period of time. Lavrenti Beria, Stalin's architect of terror and head of the NKVD, was trying to find a way to destroy him. Beria never trusted a man with so much power or popularity, and believed that he could be a threat to the cult of Stalin. Beria then had security raid Zhukov's apartment to find multiple stolen artworks, guns and other expensive items that he had nicked from the Soviet-occupied Germany without telling anyone, though this was relatively common amongst the Soviet high command. Despite his popularity, it was a massive hit to his reputation, and he was forced to publicly apologise for his actions before finding himself demoted again and sent to an even further away, insulting and pathetic position in the Urals district. Zhukov's life could have gone much worse, however. Beria would have had him arrested and shot like many of the others during the purge, but Stalin did not see the need for such a harsh punishment. Lavrenti Beria was one of Stalin's most extreme and radical followers, so when Stalin died in 1953, many of the top leaders were struggling amongst themselves to figure out who would be the next one in charge, and so a group of conspirators worked together to overthrow the last of Stalin's influencers, Lavrenti Beria. In order to destroy Beria, Malenkov, Khrushchev and Molotov met with Zhukov and hatched a plan to arrest Beria. There would be a party conference with many of the Communist Party high command attending. At the right moment, Zhukov would enter with a few army officers and arrest Beria. This arrest went off without a hitch, and Beria was taken away to officially accused of...
You are accused of treason and anti-Soviet behavior. The court finds you guilty and sentenced you to be shot.
Zhukov blamed much, if not all, of his suffering on the shoulders of Beria. He blamed him for the constant demotions and public humiliation, and he must have got a lot of personal satisfaction at the destruction of Beria, and even went on to say that the ruin of Beria and the subsequent execution was the best thing that he had ever done in his life. At the end of the Stalin era and the removal of Stalin's cult of personality, Zhukov found himself appointed as Minister of Defense of the USSR under Nikolai Bulganin. During this period, he aimed to foster peace between the United States and the Soviet Union, as well as the rest of the world, being reluctant to take military action unless absolutely necessary. This partly stemmed from the long conversations with Dwight D. Eisenhower, who he had become friends with years prior. In June of 1956, on his 60th birthday, Zhukov received the fourth and final Hero of the Soviet Union medal, which made him only one of two people in the history of the Soviet Union to gain such a prestigious award 4 times. Zhukov's prestige was higher than that of the police and the security agency of the USSR, which rekindled much of the concerns from the Communist Party. Unfortunately, Zhukov was a reformist and continued to take power to himself, which worried others in the Soviet high command. Khrushchev at this time used much of Zhukov's criticism toward the old dictatorships of Stalin to boost his own appearance and enact reform, but at the same time he was actually worried for Zhukov. Zhukov had kept demanding that soldiers speak to him before they consulted any of the other politicians. Thus, Zhukov had him removed as Minister of Defense in 1958 over fears of him becoming a Bonapartist. Considering how recently Napoleon Bonaparte had thrashed the Russians in their history, the people feared that a man could take over the country from within using the military, then run it by military dictate. Zhukov was indeed loyal, but many found his popularity and personality to be dangerous in such a position of power.
After being forced out of government by Nikita Khrushchev, Zhukov decided to withdraw fully from politics. After Khrushchev was deposed in October 1964, Brezhnev restored Zhukov to favour, though not to power, in a move to use Zhukov's popularity to strengthen his political position. Zhukov's name was put in the public eye yet again when Brezhnev licensed Zhukov in a speech commemorating the Great Patriotic War. On 9th of May 1965, Zhukov was invited to sit on the tribune of the Lenin Mausoleum and given the honour of reviewing the parade of military forces in Red Square. Zhukov had begun writing his memoirs, Memories and Recollections, in 1958. He now worked intensely on them, which together with steadily deteriorating health, seemed to worsen his heart disease. It would take another decade until publication, after Zhukov clashed constantly with Mikhail Suslov, the Communist Party's chief ideologue and second-in-command in charge of censorship, who demanded many revisions and removals, particularly his criticisms of Stalin himself. After Brezhnev came to power, Suslov made further demands to exaggerate the then Colonel Brezhnev's role in World War II by glorifying the little-known and strategically unimportant battles of the war, which Zhukov refused to do. In December 1969, Zhukov had a serious stroke. He was hospitalized until June 1968 and continued to receive medical and rehabilitative treatment at home under the care of his second wife, Galina Semyonova, a former officer in the medical corps. The stroke left him paralyzed on his left side. His speech became slurred and he could only walk with assistance. His memoirs were published in 1969 and it became an instant bestseller. Within several months of the date of publication of his memoirs, Zhukov received more than 10,000 letters from readers that offered comments, expressed gratitude, gave advice, or lavished praise. On 18th of June 1974, Zhukov died after another stroke. Contrary to Zhukov's last will for an Orthodox Christian burial, and despite the request of the family to the country's top leadership, his body was cremated, and his ashes were buried at the Kremlin wall necropolis, alongside fellow generals and marshals of the Soviet Union.
Zhukov, since his death, has had multiple statues dedicated to him in his honour of his deeds done during the war, such as the one in Mongolia after the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, and the other one in Red Square put there after the victory over Germany in 1945. Russia also established an award named the Order of Zhukov on May the 9th, 1944. Writers such as Otto Scheney described Zhukov in the closing remarks of his works as, "In the darkest period of World War II, his fortitude and determination eventually triumphed for Russians and people everywhere. He remains the enduring symbol of victory on the battlefield."